Hi, I'm Dr. Philip McMillan, and I'm here to share with you some simple, important information about science and the communication of science, where we have to be careful about what we hear and where we have to acknowledge when things go wrong. Now, I strongly believe that when we make a mistake, we need to highlight it because we don't always get everything right. And one of the issues was in the pandemic, many people were concerned about the vaccine rollout, and so therefore they didn't get vaccinated. They were very heavily criticized. But what is starting to come out is more and more people are starting to acknowledge that, well, maybe they were right in terms of what they were saying, those conspiracy theorists. Now, what I'm here to do is give you a balanced principle or approach to the science. And what I'm highlighting here is two bits of video clips that I saw on Twitter with Chief Nerd, and it was with Dr. Sanjay Gupta. And for if you don't understand, he is the chief medical correspondent at CNN. And he's done a number of presentations, and he's usually a voice for the medical issues in relation to health for CNN. The truth is, his background is more surgery. And so, therefore, he will be filtering or taking information from others and then presenting it because he's very good at presentation. But in terms of the details of the science, I wouldn't necessarily expect him to understand all the nuances of it. Even within that, however, there is still that responsibility to be relatively accurate. And one of the issues that came out recently is his comments with regards to natural immunity. To take it into consideration or to take it into context, I'm going to play
I
first
think has been clear for some
where
time
he
on
was
not
making
only
a comment on CNN, and then I'll come back to the more recent clip that he has said in an interview. So let's go to the most recent, the first clip. This was in 2021, at the heat of the rollout of COVID vaccines, and listen to the thoughts.
would say is that the science, I think, has been clear for some time on not only how well these vaccines work, as you alluded to,
Pause it there. That was the 36-second clip. So there are a few things there that was, as far as I'm concerned, purely propaganda. It wasn't really science, where if someone was vaccinated, they wouldn't transmit the virus. Because once you understand how the immune system works and you understand mucosal immunity, because it's not the same as systemic immunity, meaning that if you have antibodies in your bloodstream, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have good immune response at the front door in terms of your upper respiratory tract. And that piece of the science was very clearly missing. Now, I can't understand why they didn't know this, or maybe they did know it and they chose to ignore it. I don't know. But it was very clear that if you give an injectable vaccine against especially this virus, highly immune evasive in terms of interferon, you are not going to stop it unless you are able to stop it at the mucosal lining. So that was what he said in 2021. Now, what caught people's attention was a recent interview in 2025. And here is what he has to say now, which is what correlates a bit more closely to what is the science. Pausing that there a second. You guys are not hearing the audio. Oh man, that's a problem. Let's just try again. I'm going to try. I don't know why this is not going. So you're going to have to work with me with regards to this. So that means you didn't hear the first bit. Man, what a waste. So let's try again. I'm just going to take this off here, and I'm going to go again. And let's just try again. Second here. Oh, I see what the problem was. Just hold on, and let's just try and see if I can do the whole thing again. Okay, so let's see if you can hear it now. This was the original clip.
I would say is that the science, I think, has been clear for some time on not only how well these vaccines work, as you alluded to, but also how well they protect you, how well they work in terms of preventing you from getting sick, but also how well they work in terms of preventing you from becoming infected, and most importantly and most recently, how well they work in terms of making it unlikely you would pass the infection on to someone else. Even if you tested positive for the virus after you've been vaccinated, which does happen, rarely, but does happen, the data is now increasingly clear that you'd be very, very unlikely to then transmit the virus to somebody else. I would say is that
so I pause it there, and as I said, he said a few things there that were not correct. As I said, saying that if someone was vaccinated, they wouldn't pass on the infection. The purpose of vaccination at that time was to reduce the risk of severe COVID-19, and it did do that for the high-risk cohort. But it wasn't designed to stop transmission of the virus. Because in order to stop transmission of the virus, you would need to very strongly activate the mucosal immunity. That's the wall in terms of your upper airway where the virus actually infects these cells. If that immune system is very active and able to do what it's supposed to do, then you would have an impact on infection. So, as I said, he has at least come back recently in 2025, and this is the second clip that I want to play you. So this is him in 2025 now, sharing a bit more insight and a bit more of a retrospective look at what he thought. So here we go.
I think the one area, if I had to pick one thing for me specifically, where I think we started to dig in, but could have dug in more, was really understanding the value of natural immunity. Mm-hmm. I think you and I both, when we go to medical school, we know that once you get sick, you are going to be immune for a while. Different for different viruses, but that does provide really robust immunity. Mm-hmm. It's activating your antibodies, activating your T cells. All these things get activated with an illness. No question that it'd be better to avoid that illness in the first place. It goes without saying. But I think at the point where it was clear that so many people had been infected, and we saw these waves in South Africa, for example, and you knew, wow, that burned through the entire population, it seemed like almost, because it all of a sudden came way down. It's like, oh, that's the natural immunity, because they hadn't been vaccinated yet. Mm-hmm. Then pop up again with the new variant. That should have been a signal that, hey, we need to be well aware that natural immunity is strong. It works, and I think some of the Israeli data. So I asked about that a few times in terms of how that would change recommendations based on vaccines and other things. Never really got a clear answer on that. Mm-hmm. And I think the message seemed to be just get vaccinated, which was obviously a problem because not everyone was getting vaccinated. People were losing their jobs, all this sort of stuff. So I think the natural immunity part of it still to this day is a bit of a question mark as to why that wasn't acknowledged more.
Excellent. Yep, he's right. Because remember, people did lose their jobs about this in terms of natural immunity. And here's what's most important. In that context, you have to remember that early in the pandemic, when you had healthcare workers facing the pandemic without even PPE in the early days, having to get infected, some getting sick and dying, they then had natural immunity for the whole of the first year until vaccines came around. And then to mandate those healthcare workers with vaccines. I mean, that is the most unscientific thing I have ever seen. And up to this day, I don't think there's anybody who can reasonably say, listen, that was the best thing to do. Now, in your low risk cohorts, again, why would you do that? Especially if they had infection. And what's even more, so follow this again, people who had an infection, so they just had COVID, they may have had severe COVID, they were in hospital, they come out of hospital, and they're still being recommended to be vaccinated after they had the infection. Where is the science in that? And so this is what I mean, is that some of the stuff that was done, I'm telling you, 50 years down the line, history is going to have a field day saying, this is going to be equivalent to not washing hands in the 1700s, whenever that was happening, where it just made no sense. So here is now where I'll give you some important points with regards to the data. This was an Israeli study that was submitted in January of 2022 and published in April of 2022, looking at directly natural acquired immunity versus vaccine-induced immunity, reinfections and breakthrough infections. This was a very important study, and they were looking at a large group in Israel, up to 124,000 people. And what they found was that people, SARS-CoV-2 naive vaccinees, had a 13.06-fold increased risk for breakthrough infection with the Delta variant compared to their unvaccinated, previously infected individuals. We knew this. Well, granted, this was in April of 2022. It was after they had instituted vaccine mandates, I think inappropriately. They should have just targeted the high-risk people, and they knew that it could impact on the severity of the disease. I'm telling you, if they had done what they should have done, I keep on saying this, if they had done what they should have done and hadn't been greedy, if they had just vaccinated the high risk and then moved the vaccines on to the rest of the world instead of hoarding it in first world countries and vaccinating all the way down to children, the pandemic would have been over. Because the people who were low risk, even though some of them would have had severe disease, that's an important point, but you would have hit herd immunity. What they're not acknowledging, and this is very, very important, is that in reality, natural immunity on its own, without being skewed by a spike protein focus, would have stopped the virus. You just have to look at the low vaccinated countries in the world, Papua New Guinea, Haiti. They don't have a COVID problem. Where you see a problem is highly vaccinated regions, and they still don't want to acknowledge that there was an impact on even mucosal immunity by skewing the immune system towards the Wuhan, the original variant of the virus. This is why we have a problem. And this is where we are. There is no easy way out of this. Just a few other points that I want to highlight from this paper. It shows in the follow-up period, out of the 16,000 matched people, they had 257 cases of infection occurring, of which 238 occurred in the vaccinated group. Those are the breakthrough infections. And 19 in the previously infected group. Okay, so that's important. That's where the 13-fold increased risk of breakthrough infections were. Now follow this. This is really, really important. If you scroll down to here, this bit says 8 of the cases for COVID-19 related hospitalization, that means they had respiratory compromise, were recorded, all of which were in the vaccinated group. So listen, this is the bit that they miss. natural infection is not associated with severe COVID-19. And there's a reason for that. As I said, when you understand the science, you understand why that is so. Because with natural infection, the mucosal immune system, so even if someone gets an infection, a reinfection, if they have natural immunity, unvaccinated, they still trigger an interferon response, which is relatively early. And so even though they may get the infection, they will not really get severe COVID-19 unless they have interferon autoantibodies, which is a separate conversation. But generally, they won't. In the context of the vaccine, vaccine immunity, if the virus suppresses interferon, they can still trigger a severe response, which is why 8 were hospitalized here in terms of severe COVID-19, because they still had respiratory compromise, and it was still important that that had to be addressed. Now, none of them died, but I'm showing you the connection in response to severe the thromboembolic microclotting that occurs in the lungs. So the end all of it is that, yes, people's instincts were right, because this is what we had been taught. You know, if you got measles, you naturally, and you weren't vaccinated, you wouldn't go and get a measles vaccine. You know, it just didn't make sense. You know, and so that principle has not changed. It only changed in relation to the pandemic because there was such a push to vaccinate everyone. What we still don't fully understand is why. Why was that so important that even the science, even the obvious, was overlooked so that it could have been pushed through that literally every single person, and then you look at the US down to 6 months old, still in some places, would have been vaccinated, whether or not they had infection, whether or not they were low risk. That still doesn't make sense to me. And I suspect that those who figure out why that was so important will have the real clue to what really was going on. I don't know if they're conspiracy theorists, but you will never know what they may find. My final advice to you all is, as usual, look in the description, get the Humming Heroes link. There's a free ebook there. We want you to buy the full book for Christmas, but there's a free black and white version which gives you the principles about why you should hum, why nitric oxide is antiviral, and that's probably the most important simple strategy anybody can implement to reduce their risk of ongoing circulation with the virus. So thank you all for listening, and we look forward to sharing some more information with you in the near future. Coincidentally, I can't find, let's see if I can get it. I will play my outro video now. Oops, I can't get it. Oh, I tell you what, I know what I need to do. Yeah, there we go. Have a great evening.
A hero, an immune adventure. Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.